Good afternoon. Thank responsive crowd. Thank you for being at our reflections program. The first test. Look at the slide up on the. Who sees something that's amiss with the slide? Man, what do you got, Dean?
His name is spelled incorrectly.
Yeah, right. I want to introduce Ern Reynolds instead of whatever. That's our fault. We apologize, Ern. Yeah. Yeah,
Well, yeah, but if you're dyslexic like me, it makes no difference.
Yeah. Ern was born in Richmond, but he grew up in Roanoke and graduated from Jefferson High School. He says in '59. And so did his wife, the former Winnie Haley, whom some of the local residents may remember. Ern's career has been as an attorney, but he claims that he has other habits that are really quite good. He also says he's anti-intellectual. He's not anti-intellectual, but he is anti-academic, and we'll get a touch of that later on. I want to go to another slide. Now, the other day we had a new resident that came on second floor, and I was trying to help her get settled, and she was having trouble with her television. And I looked, and there were 3 of these remotes sitting on the table. And after an hour and a half of punching buttons, she still didn't have a television. I gave up, she gave up, and we put in a work order for the IT folks to come get her out of a jam, which happened. But it calls to mind, if you visit Ern's quarters over in AL 507, that is half of his bedroom. I want you to look at that, folks. 4 screens and 5 computers, and for most of us can't navigate a TV set. Can you imagine looking at that? He's been involved in the cyber field, 81, I think you said, okay. And that's a long time back, and those of us who did have computers in the early days can remember those little compact things with the orange letters and all. But that's really going back compared to what we have now, that is get you to the moon and back without too much trouble. But Ern's been right in the middle of that world since the 80s. That's amazing, and it's no wonder then that his bedroom looks like that. Most of us have other pursuits that we'd like to do from time to time. Looks to me like he just turns those things on and watches the screens. Good for him. But today we're pleased to have Ern Reynolds as our guest speaker, and I'm not going to tell you much about his background. He's going to do that, and then talk about a subject that's very dear to his heart. So, Ern, thank you, and welcome to Reflections.
Well, thanks very much, Buster. In spite of that kind introduction, I want to take you back to the 18th and 19th centuries. Supposedly, the first modern English novel was Tristram Shandy, Gentleman.
Use the mic.
Supposedly, the first modern English novel was Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, by an Anglican clergyman named Lawrence Sterne. He was one of my collateral ancestors, and in this novel that was supposed to be the first modern novel, in English. He wandered all over the place, but he was so full of tangents and digressions that people found it amusing. Well, some of us, including his descendants, have trouble not wandering around and going down to digressions and tangents. It's very difficult if you inherited a buggy set of software, as I diagnosedly did, to get a coherent narrative theme. But that's what I'll be talking about. Did you steal where did it go? Am I not seeing it? Oh, here we go. Yeah. If you're dyslexic like me, the R-E-N-Y, that ought to be R-E-Y-N, I'm going to read it correctly because I perceptually feel it. When I look at the word, the syllable drops out, but I end up supplying what I believe rather than what the text actually says. Now, in law school, that's nearly fatal because when you go to law school, you find out that English does not make English. You're dealing with a lot of very narrow technical meanings that can get you messed up. It went so far that the American Bar Association had an editorial once saying, "Beware of left-handed dyslexic lawyers," of which I am one. I agreed to speak today because I want to ask several of you to help me complete a publication project. One of the things that Lawrence Stern did in his novel here was he came up with the idea of a hobby horse. A hobby horse, to him and everybody who's used the phrase since, is something that's almost idiosyncratic to the person who adopts it. Am I being able to be heard all right?
Stay in front of that microphone.
Oh, okay. I'll try not to wander too much. All right, thank you. Back on July 10th, Buster invited me to give this presentation, and the way I read his outline, it sort of suggested that whoever comes and talks about their past life is being asked to what is euphemistically called open the kimono. So I'll sort of flash you and give you just a few glimpses of my life, and hopefully this will not offend decorum or good taste. But I'll leave you that to judge for yourself. When I first met Buster here, it occurred here in the wood shop. And that's for those of you who don't know, that's a dusty, windowless working space where people can do sawing, planing, sanding, and staining. It prompted me to pick the splinters and sawdust as the theme to introduce myself. And here's why. I'm claiming that splinters and sawdust are a metaphor for my life's course. It fits because the phrase captures what has to be removed from the rough edges. And not only did I have plenty of rough edges, I think I developed new ones. The wood shop here also reminds me of my father's personal workshop. My earliest memories of my dad include his insistence that I call every tool by its right name. And that was easy to do. But the hard lesson Dad taught me was figure things out for yourself without asking him. For instance, any tool in his hand seemed to always get a better result than when I did it. But I kept at it, I persisted, and I asked him very seriously to tell me why it was that I had failed. And he always responded with what still 70-odd years later feels like child abuse. And this is what he told me. You weren't holding your mouth right. Now, I think translated, that means figure it out for yourself. And figure it out for yourself, among other things, is very Protestant conduct. You don't ask for help. You're supposed to have your own understanding. And so that's one defect, as I see it, in Protestant religions. I'm embarrassed to say that I have been, that I failed to hold my mouth right consistently until I was about age 28. Splinters and sawdust, they trailed along with me like they were stuck on the bottom of my shoe soles. With my two sons, I invited their request to explain, and so far there have been no ill effects noticeable in them. They were the most trouble-free two boys in my neighborhood, so maybe the negative example my dad carries on there. But other people I've noticed have splinters and sawdust that occur at surprise times in their lives. One lady she's now dead, but I was able to make her acquaintance, wrote the book In a Daughter's Eye. Her name was Mary Catherine Bateson, and when she was the daughter of cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead and a less well-known today cybernetician Gregory Bateson. When Mary Catherine Bateson was a little girl, she tried to be obedient and to please her parents, and she took to her heart very seriously the Luke 23:26 story about Simon of Cyrene, who was forced to carry a burden that led to that grand old Protestant hymn, "Gladly his cross I'd bear." But, like me, she ran into splinters and sawdust. During the shortages of World War II, somebody gave her a discarded stuffed animal, a teddy bear. And the teddy bear she promptly named Gladly. So what she showed her parents was Gladly, the cross-eyed bear. To her little understanding, that was just one of the earlier negative memories for her. But it was also her first experience of what later came to be called acute intellectual embarrassment. She missed it completely. Now, the effect of splinters and sawdust on me was similar. Too often, I would take a message that was not meant, and I still do. What I've come to understand is this: there is what's ostensible, the message you see and hear, but it's not the message that's underneath. And what I want to talk about is the hidden message that's underneath, because that I wanted to ask your help with. The reason that you've got 3x5 cards and pencils where you are is I hope a few of you will share with me your name, address, and phone number to help me with an editorial project that I'll be describing here. But anyhow, the spoken word seemed to me to be much harder to learn. Particularly when I was a child, the shifting meaning among adults would always throw me. I would go for the literal, and it did not turn out to be a literal meaning. And here's an example. Suppose you were asked this question: do you smoke after sex? Now, the proper answer is, I don't know. I never checked. When I got my first pair of spectacles in third grade, but myopia was a secondary problem. My very bright parents never figured out why my low grades never matched my great liking for school. Neither did any of my teachers or professors. My report cards were mediocre from 7th grade through cybernetics graduate school. Now, cybernetics, which is a word that gets tossed around very loosely, when looked at tightly, is actually the science of communication control, or system science. So cybernetics and system science are the same thing. I'm not going to finesse my college freshman follies and mistakes. I'm going to show you where it led me. My first year English class at the University of Virginia included several essays by George Orwell. I was convinced that the unifying theme of those essays was misunderstanding change as it occurred. But my professor had to sit me down one-on-one and disclose that the semester-long message that he and Orwell intended was to reveal the abuse of power, and I had just missed that entirely. The tree that I had noticed did not match the larger forest. In addition to other first-year troubles, I failed a course in elementary logic. In fact, I put 3 years of academic frustration under my belt before I dropped out of college for 6 months. When I did return to UVA from Marine Corps Reserve training, my very undistinguished grades denied me entrance in the honors program in political science. As Dr. Morgan told me memorably when he asked me my grade point average, and I told him, he said, "Mr. Reynolds, there are other men at this university who have a more valid claim upon my time." So what I did was took the conventional political science courses because the privilege of independent study, which would really suited me much better, would not be allowed me. When I was actually a first semester fourth yearman, when I switched my major to something in which I had no hours. So it took me longer to finish college than it did. And I also noticed among both my sons, at the end of 3 years, each one of them was ready to leave. They did not want to do a fourth year of college at all, but to essentially satisfy mom and dad, they went ahead and did the last year just to get the degree. And I think there's something physiological about that. 3 years worth of college was enough for any of us. When I finished up, the political science department, or I think everybody in the College of Arts and Sciences at UVA at that time who graduated was required to take the graduate records examination in their major, whether they wanted to go to grad school or not. And my results on that was all of the honors people, they they did the best on graduate records. And then came people in the conventional political science regular, but I was the outlier. I outscored them all, and it was one of my very, very few academic distinctions because my grades all the way through the major were mediocre. It was never reflected in notable marks from our courses, and that was in spite of the fact that I am not intimidated by a blue book, but I just could never do what blue books require. I could excel at entrance testing, I could excel at exit testing, and do so poorly in the middle. Now, that unconventional mixture of strengths came to grief at my first law school. I scored very high on the law school aptitude test. I also scored very high on the cultural background test. But the thing that really put me over was I had enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve 6 years before, and at a time when people were being drafted out of law school before they could finish, all of a sudden I had an honorable discharge. So I'll give the Marine Corps credit for getting me into school in 1968. It was June of 68. Turned out that June of 68 was the very peak of casualties during the Vietnam War as far as American losses were concerned. There in law school, I really enjoyed the university community. I enjoyed my fellow students. I enjoyed the courses, and I enjoyed my professors. My class attendance was nearly perfect, and I liked to find a desk at the front row so to not miss what was said, and I also took a lot of notes. So for an entire 8 months, I felt equal to the milieu and the coursework, but that all turned out to be an illusion. I even got admitted to the joint JD MBA degree, where instead of going to law school for 3 years, you split your time between the law school and the business school, and you get a 4-year hyphenated JD MBA. So I was looking to go to that in the subject of communication and control. More about that phrase later. That happens to be a definition of cybernetics. But that first year at Harvard Law School featured no graded for keeps examinations. And I flunked out in the spring by 1 grade point on the torts exam. And all my other grades were passing but low. The only decent grade I got was one course by Mr. Justice Breyer. That was while he was still a professor and before he went on to the Supreme Court. But that vocational disaster really hurt deeply. My ex-wife never got over suspecting that I had somehow been lazy outside her purview. And I could not understand. I thought I'd done everything right. But clearly there were some splinters and sawdust that I had not properly accounted for. The whole experience reminds me of what my favorite cybernetics author defined as education. My favorite cybernetician is the Isaac Newton of the science. He was a pathologist and psychiatrist, an interesting medical combination, by the name of Ross Ashby. And he defined education as the wreckage that is left after the experiences of training. Well, that suited splinters and sawdust, quite well. Now, there was a 4-year gap between when I finished UVA and started law school. But the outcome was no different, and the experience, in essence, was identical. When I had been at UVA, you were always vulnerable to getting kicked out if you were at the probation level. Because I had taken that odd-numbered hour logic course and failed it, I hovered between probation and good standing for 4.5 years, 9 straight semesters, which is almost mathematically impossible to do. Now, in retrospect, here's what happened to me in Cambridge. Law study anywhere turns familiar words into new terms of art. As I mentioned earlier, in law school, ordinary English does not make courtroom English. Possibly the best ancient capsule of that phenomenon is this. Attorney John Quincy Adams once told Chief Justice John Marshall, quote, that I thought it was law logic, an artificial system of reasoning exclusively used in courts of justice, but good for nothing anywhere else. J.Q. Adams was actually referring to what cyberneticians call dialectic recursion, which is to say nested shells of meaning. Have you ever seen a set of Russian dolls? What's peculiar about a set of Russian dolls is that you will have as many as, say, 8 dolls, each of which is smaller than the previous one, until you get down to the smallest one in the bundle. That is a phenomenon called recursive nesting. Every one of them was a czar or a ruler, but the ones way back were small and in the distance, and the current one, which would be Putin, would be the largest. But that property of recursive nesting tells you an awful lot, and you can do a lot with it that I may describe very, very briefly. But more to the point right now, let's take an English word, consideration. Consideration in the way that we talk about it in ordinary conversation is not the same thing that lawyers think of as consideration. Most title deeds will recite, for $10 and other good and valuable consideration, I give Blackacre. Here's the perverse joke in that. This example and many others make laymen think that lying is part of every lawyer's toolkit. It's not, but we're not using the same definitions. My large vocabulary and my ludic reading worked against me. Worked against me at UVA, worked against me at Harvard, worked against me ad nauseum. Because I've been a voracious reader since I was 5 years old. At both schools, I read and absorbed too much of what I believed and too little of what the authors intended. Now, that happens to be excusable for Marines, but I am prone to being jar-headed in more than one way. Splinters and sawdust arrive all over again. Reading is great pleasure for me, and my vocabulary is ample, but the message I internalize from ludic, voracious reading yields this nagging paradox, the splinters and sawdust that I'm trying to acquaint you better with. My immediate comprehension is very high, though my insights and originality can be seriously error-prone. Now, the military have a slang phrase for that. Too often, I'm spring-loaded in the dumb position. That description also reminded me of the time I questioned a policeman. What kind of disorderly conduct caused him to arrest my client. And the explanation I got was this: my client, quote, had been acting stupid in public. The message there is ostensible behavior, and then there is what's underneath. And the policeman was trying to express what was underneath, but he had to do it in terms of that didn't quite do the job. These surprise tendencies recited here have much to do with asking for help. I'd like several of you to assist me with an arguably very original publication project, but you deserve to know a bit more about it before saying yes. I claim to never having been anti-intellectual, but grade-wise I'm very anti-academic. That's a recipe for lots of splinters and sawdust in your life. But what happened to me at age 28? At age 28, I ran into a developmental optometrist who told me what had been going on since age 6 and what little that I could do about it. My eyes and my spectacles allow an accurate signal to reach my brain undistorted, but that's just the hardware side of it. The software in my right rear occipital lobe is buggy. My visual processing oscillates moment to moment from adequate to faulty to back. I'm actually learning disabled and too rigid to entirely train it out of myself. When I read, words and syllables blip out on me. But if I'm reading silently, I don't know it, because everything that blipped out, I ended up supplying from what I believed rather than what the author intended. So that will absolutely wreck you in law school. It doesn't matter how big a vocabulary you've got. If you don't have a legal vocabulary, you're lost in space. It's the equivalent of your understanding getting kicked in the head, even though I can't feel it happening. It's just splinters and sawdust, on and on. When this revelation reached me at age 28, I was well on the road to flunking out of another law school at the University of Kentucky. The eye doctor who set me straight said he couldn't fix me, but he could give me a workaround. He advised me that silent reading for class preparation would guarantee more academic failure. But here's the workaround. If I read my law books out loud, every lost word and missed syllable would be logically jarring. And that deficit in my visual processing would surface. I could not stand to read aloud for myself, but there was a blind student in my class who I persuaded if he would sign up for the courses I wanted to take, I would read to him in all of them, and he did not have to pay me. So at the end of his and my getting our degrees, he took the Kentucky bar examination 5 different times and failed it every time, which was all they allowed him. And I took 3 bar exams in 30 days and eventually passed them all. But my grades were lousy. And even reading it aloud, it did not bring my grade point average up very much. But here's the benefit to take from this backstory. Anglo-American attorneys like me trained for 3 to 4 years to torque themselves in the direction of thinking like a lawyer. Now, system science or cybernetics demands that its practitioners unwind themselves in precisely the opposite logical direction. And I trained myself to do both, but that twisting and untorquing took years. What I offer you here is a couple of different powerful ways of thinking, and that has a great deal to do with this project that I'm going to ask you to help me with. What's automatic for me is thinking constantly on at least two tracks at once. This is a detrimental side effect of my amblyopia. But what's worse is my personality quirk that second track insists upon producing contrary examples in real time. The technical label for that is knucklehead. But that drag also makes me a picky learner. It was a joyous occasion in my 30s when I discovered that sensing and spotting residual associative links or probative underlying similarities on the side could have some intellectual respectability in cybernetics. The one word label for that is called isomorphisms. But my peculiar blindness enables me to be a competent cybernetician. Systems science, or cybernetics, emphasizes holistic synthesis in one track. It complements the second track of analytic reduction, which is mostly what lawyers and judges are trained to do, plus the third track of abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning is following hunches, seeing around corners. We cyberneticians claim we can see around corners because when we find ourselves in the presence of what we sort of sense or intuit to be a complete system, if it is a viable system, then we know what the classic 5 elements of a viable system are, and we also know which of the ones that are usually weak are missing entirely. And that's how cyberneticians see around the corners. But in doing so, you're often going to come up with answers that offend people. Cybernetics has never caught on in the United States for the reason that it is also the science of bad news. And it's very difficult to sell bad news when the people who are writing the checks want good news. Now, what I discovered in reading this great big 18th century book, there was a Prussian general who died in 1831 by the name of Karl von Clausewitz, and he thought that he was writing about war, but in fact he was writing about cybernetics, everything underneath. He had such a way of stating why things work the way they do that even though he would be making an antique observation, I mean, we no longer assault masonry fortresses with smoothbore cannon. That's completely antique. But the underlying reasons that when he would make an operative statement were easily the most prescient and revealing insights into any activity that involves strategic planning. So today, even though this man died in 1831, his work, this 600 pages, is still taught in business schools, and the lessons of strategic planning carry over into statecraft, warfare, religion, and politics. When you get down to the fundamental underlying principles, this man had a marvelous mind. And he could come up with so many examples that, well, let me try showing you here. All right, this happens to be the first page of the 11th chapter of On War. In German, it was Vom Krieg. And that happens to be modern German. The best scholarly version of this classic book has gone through no fewer than 8 translations into modern German, and this is the best from the 1831 version. I have no command of German whatever. I have to deal with it in English. Now, there have been several different attempts to translate it, and one of the most widespread was done by a couple of British colonels, Army colonels. In 1873, here's the same start of the chapter, and in 1908, the two colonels' names were Graham and Maud. Colonel Maud went through this edition, this fat book in 1 volume, printed out in the earlier English version in 3 volumes. But he added notes on the American Civil War and the Boer War in South Africa, and he thought he was being very modern and up to date with it. But he never hit anything that was the cybernetic fundamentals. It's the cybernetic fundamentals that are the fun part of this. That's just the next page. In 1987, a couple more Brits, Michael Howard and his student Peter Parrott, decided another translation was needed. And so this is that same chapter done in modern English. Now, you'll notice that I have marked here in the margins cybernetic principles. This is valuable to me, and I think to anybody who's interested in system science. It's valuable to me and to anyone interested in system science because it's best to begin with the example. Clausewitz had the example. Now, in a sense, I've already done the heavy lifting. I've identified what, like this is the darkness principle. No system can be known completely. So, what's been done with this, with what you see, is this. Every statement that's historic, ignored, thrown out, not considered. Any statement that's an operative principle gets considered. Is it true or is it false? And if so, what makes it true or false? And it is what makes it true or false that the 30 most important principles of cybernetics buttresses. If you could read a half a dozen or a dozen or even more examples of the darkness principle as Clausewitz wrote it, you'll understand the darkness principle better. I can state the darkness principle, but it sounds so abstract that it's not very helpful. The darkness principle is, once again, no system can be known completely. So that means that when you're having to make decisions, you're always making decisions off of partial and incomplete information. Now, when you're doing strategic planning and you've got only partial and incomplete information, there's an awful lot of opportunity to go wrong. In order to go right, you need to get down to the bedrock fundamentals, which is give me several clear examples of the darkness principle so I don't violate it. The big problem that I've had with all this, and what I'm seeking your help for, is this. I have gone through all 600 pages, and any time there was an instance of one of these principles coming up, like here's the darkness principle I was referring to, in some of the chapters in the more obsolete and less good translation, they occur at page 120, lines 17 through 21. The book, the better translation that the Princeton University Press put out, is over 600 pages, and there are 125 chapters. I need help in doing all this. In other words, figuring out the page number and the line numbers for this reason. I would like to publish these tables, but the copyright owners at the Princeton University Press will not allow me to do so. This is one of their cash cows. Virtually every high-level military organization in the world teaches some version of Clausewitz, because if you're going to talk about strategy, you got to get to what he did. So this is a big seller for the Princeton University Press. The Victorian version is not as good a translation, but it has one virtue. That virtue is it's out of copyright. So, what I can do as a matter of what lawyers call fair use is I can publish the page numbers and the line numbers, but I'm not allowed to tell you what was said there. I can show you comparable passages in the out of copyright version, but you will notice that the translation in most cases is distinctly inferior. Now, this is a project that I've been working on off and on for 30 years, and I'm not getting any faster at it. But what I can do is, with the help of other people, I can delegate pieces of it. Now, when I say delegate pieces of it, I don't have all 125 chapters done. What I have done is scan every page in both editions. I can furnish the text, and I need someone to simply mark the page number and the line numbers in the inferior edition. Now, if you really want to get down to the fun of it, the joy of finding things out, you would go to, well, what does the darkness principle mean in this context? That's the detective story. Again, I've done the heavy lifting, but for the enjoyment of it, you need to go back and see why it is hidden underneath. From the time we were all children, we have obeyed those 30 principles of cybernetics. They are implicit. What the writings do is simply make them explicit. But unlike the laws that Congress and other legislative bodies make, or what goes on in courts, the principles of cybernetics, there is no appeal. And they all operate at once, not just one or two of them. But that's how system science works in a nutshell. The thing that I wanted to ask of you, as well as answer whatever questions I can manage to hear, is anyone who would like to help me try this out for 10 or 20 pages. I need your name, address, and phone number. If you tried it out, you can see whether or not you find it to be fun and interesting or not. I find it to be fun and interesting. You might. It's a detective story. And if you want to be the detective, then hopefully I can introduce you to that joy as well. With that, I will take any questions that you wanted to ask of me, and I hope that I will get a handful of volunteers.
Okay. You have the cards. You can fill them out and just leave them in your seat, or you can bring them up here. Ern, thank you very much. We enjoyed hearing about cybernetics and cyber science.
My hobby horse.
Yeah, exactly. And we appreciate you taking time to prepare and share it with us. Thank you.